This week I'll be discussing the alternative options to standardized testing. One of the issues that can be seen in eliminating standardized testing is how do we efficiently measure the intelligence and knowledge of a student? So I researched the alternative options and I found the ones that I believe would be most efficient and most reliable. I received much of this information in quotes from NPR Education. One option is sampling, where students take a similar test to standardized testing, however less students take it. This will give an estimate and overview of the students and the school district's educational process as a whole. Many countries, such as Finland, use this process for surveying so that there is less pressure on the students, so ultimately you could get a better outcome. Internationally, countries strongly implement sampling tests such as National Report Assessments and PISA, and they prove as an accurate measurement of the students as a whole. While this will eliminate the pass or fail aspect of testing, there still needs to be an individual determiner of whether or not the student should be retained or moved up. An option for determining the quality of a school district is something called statewide longitudinal data systems, which take a broader and more advanced look into a school district's progress and will examine several aspects of a student's education. It is defined by NPR Education as, quote, a big approach combining information from a number of different sources, such as graduation rates, discipline outcomes, demographic information, teacher-created assessments, and eventually workforce outcomes. This information, in return, can be used to gauge the performance of students, schools, and teachers over time. While this system is meant for analyzing the bigger picture, there's also an option for more of an individual approach. It's titled Portfolio-Based Assessments. As defined, these assessments, quote, include projects, individual and group presentations, reports and papers, and portfolios of work collected over time. Personally, I think this approach will be a true reflection of a student's achievements and knowledge. Compared to standardized testing, this method will calculate a student's work ethic because it is based off of several things, and I believe that is the most important part to determine whether or not the student will be successful, not off of one test. Lastly, in order to see if a school district is doing their job, so to speak, there can be inspections by the state to observe lessons in students' work. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of this one. However, I assume that the state would need some ultimate control, and this is the way that the state can still be involved, but limited. Not only will these ideas be a determiner for a school to determine if a teacher is effective and whether or not the student has learned their needed material, and for the state to determine the quality of a school district, but it will also allow colleges to look at prospective students with a more accurate determiner of whether or not that student will be an asset to that college or university. I came across other options such as stealth assessments, game-based assessments, and emotional and social skills surveys. These ideas are relatively new, so it's hard to tell if they're efficient, although social and emotional skills surveys did catch my eye. NPR has stats from a recent test where 875,000 students took the Gallup poll nationwide, grades 5 through 12. According to this study, students' hope scores on this poll do a better job of predicting the college persistence and GPA than do high school GPA, SATs, or ACT scores. So overall, these ideas could catch a spark in a decade or so. However, in the meantime, I would focus on the alternative options that have been implemented into countries that supersede the U.S. in academics. In conclusion, I believe in order to have an efficient and competitive academics in the U.S., we would need to implement several of these ideas, especially the portfolio-based assessments. Teachers often neglect whether or not the student has learned the material and needed as long as they remember the material long enough to pass the test. However, if we implement portfolio-based assessments, teachers will focus on designing projects and lessons and ideas for students to learn and do. This may be a more complicated process than administering several bubbled-in answer tests and letting them be scanned by measuring a student's minds. This may be a more complicated process than administering several bubbled-in answers tests and letting them be scanned. But measuring students' minds should be measured by advanced and long-term measures. This will ultimately increase the quality of our country's academics and allow the U.S. to be at the top of the charts one day. These ideas will eliminate the statewide mandate testing, but still measure a student's knowledge and intelligence and work ethic, but more fairly.